It was late October of 2016, somewhere deep in the northern woods of Montana, about 20 miles from the nearest small town. I had driven up there alone for a 4-day hunting and camping trip. I was 28 then, and I'd been hunting since I was a teenager, but this was the first time I decided to go completely alone. No friends, no guides, no cell service, no backup. I wanted quiet. I wanted to get away from people, noise, and the constant pressure of city life. I thought a few nights in the cold wilderness would clear my head. The drive up took nearly 6 hours from where I lived. The last part of the route was a rough Forest Service road, narrow and half buried in fallen pine needles and mud. It was early evening when I finally pulled over beside a small clearing near a creek. I parked my old Ford, got out, and the first thing I noticed was how still everything felt. The air was sharp and clean, and the only sound came from the slow running water behind the trees. I set up my tent facing the tree line, maybe 50 yards from the truck, and stacked my supplies, the cooler, lantern, extra gear, in a neat pile near the fire pit. I gathered wood, lit a small fire, and cooked a can of beans before dark swallowed everything around me. The night came quick and heavy. Out there, once the sun dropped, it was pitch black. My flashlight barely reached the edge of the trees. The first night went fine. I didn't sleep great. The ground was cold, and I kept hearing small cracks and rustles outside the tent. But that's normal in the woods. Deer, rabbits, raccoons. I reminded myself of that. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The temperature had dropped below freezing overnight. My breath came out white and thick. I made coffee on the camp stove, grabbed my rifle, and hiked out before first light. I followed a small animal trail up toward the ridge. My plan was to scout for elk, maybe find some tracks, and return later with a better plan. I walked for hours through uneven terrain, stopping often to listen and mark spots on my map. Around noon, I came across something odd. A small old hunting blind made of rotting wood and tarp, tucked low between two boulders. It looked abandoned, but the ground nearby was disturbed, almost as if someone had been there recently. I crouched down, noticed cigarette butts, and a couple of empty beer cans half buried in the dirt. Whoever used that spot wasn't careful. By the time I made it back to camp, the sun was low again. I was tired, hungry, and my legs ached from climbing. I cooked some meat over the fire and sat there for a while, just listening. Around then, I started feeling something strange. A quiet, uneasy tension in the air. It wasn't fear yet, just a pressure, like the forest itself was holding its breath. When I finally crawled into my tent, I heard faint crunching outside. I thought it was a deer. The sound moved slow, circled the area once, then faded. I told myself it was nothing and fell asleep. The third day started normally. I went out again, hiked a few miles north this time, found some elk tracks but nothing worth following. Around midday, I came across a narrow clearing with a dead animal, a deer half buried under leaves. It hadn't been shot. I didn't see a bullet wound. His throat was torn open, but not like a predator kill. It looked messy and deliberate. I stepped back, uneasy. I didn't smell rot yet, which meant it hadn't been there long. Maybe a day, maybe less. I remember feeling watched then. The trees were completely still, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was there. It's strange how the woods can make your mind twist small sounds into warnings. Every crack of a branch, every shift of wind sounded like footsteps. I got back to camp earlier than usual that day. The air felt heavy, colder than before. I built the fire higher just to have more light. The smell of pine smoke helped calm me a little, but that same feeling stayed, like the woods around me were waiting for something. It was sometime around midnight when I woke up to a faint sound outside my tent. It wasn't an animal this time. It was slower, heavier, too steady. Footsteps. I froze, every muscle tensed. The sound moved near the fire pit. My lantern outside was still dimly glowing, and through the thin wall of my tent, I could see a dark shape moving. My first thought was that another hunter had wandered into my camp, maybe drunk or lost, but I hadn't seen a single person in 3 days, and no vehicles had passed by. I reached quietly for my rifle beside me. The steps stopped. Then, I heard a soft rustle, like someone picking something up from the ground. My heart was pounding so loud it drowned everything else. I didn't move. After maybe 30 seconds, the shape shifted again and walked toward the creek, vanishing into the darkness. I waited another minute, then unzipped the tent just a few inches. The fire had burned down to red embers, and the lantern light flickered weakly. I saw prints in the dirt, boot prints, not animal tracks, but clear, heavy boot marks leading toward the trees. That night, I barely slept. I sat inside the tent with the rifle across my lap, listening. Every now and then, I thought I heard movement far off, but I couldn't be sure. When daylight finally came, I stepped out and checked the area. The prints were real, large, deep, and fresh. I followed them a short distance, but they disappeared near the creek bed where the mud turned to rock. I tried to tell myself it was just another hunter camping nearby, maybe cutting through my sight by accident. But there were no other camps, no parked trucks, nothing. The road to this area was blocked off for the season. Nobody should have been up there. By afternoon, I made the decision to leave a day early. I packed my gear fast, trying not to look into the woods too much. It's strange how even the sound of birds feels different when you're afraid. But before I left, I went to grab my cooler from beside the fire pit and noticed that the top was open. Inside, the food was gone. The cans of soda were crushed and tossed aside, and my small hunting knife that I'd left next to it was missing. That moment hit me harder than anything else. Whoever had walked through my camp wasn't just passing by. They had gone through my things while I slept 10 feet away. I loaded everything into the truck as fast as I could. The whole time, I kept glancing into the trees, half expecting someone to step out. Nothing moved, but I swear I could feel eyes on me. The dirt road out of there felt twice as long. My tires slipped on the mud, and every shadow between the pines made me tighten my grip on the wheel. When I finally reached the main road, I stopped for a while, just sitting there, trying to steady myself. A few miles down the highway, I passed a small ranger station. I pulled in and told the officer there what happened, the footprints, the stolen food, the knife. He didn't look surprised. He said that sometimes squatters or even off-grid drifters live deep in the woods out there. Some of them don't like strangers. Some watch camps at night, waiting for supplies to be left unattended. He told me I was lucky. That night, when I finally got home, I unpacked everything in silence. My clothes still smelled like pine smoke and cold dirt. I kept thinking about those boot prints, about the sound of someone moving around my camp while I slept, unarmed and unaware. It's been years since that trip, and I still go hunting, but never alone anymore. I don't camp deep in the woods. I stay near trails, near people, where I can hear the hum of a road or see the faint light of another campfire at night. Because it wasn't the wilderness that scared me out there. It was realizing that someone else had been watching me in the dark the whole time. Someone who never wanted me to see them. Someone who waited until I was asleep to step into the circle of my firelight and go through everything I had. That thought still keeps me awake sometimes. The idea that, in the middle of that quiet forest, I wasn't alone, and never even knew it until the very end. I went camping alone once in the fall of 2017, up in northern Montana near a place called Clear Creek. It was late September, the kind of time when the woods start to quiet down for winter. The air was crisp, the nights were cold, and there was that stillness in the forest that made you feel both peaceful and uneasy at the same time. I had taken a week off from work, I was 29 then, living in Billings, working a job that kept me sitting in front of screens all day. I just wanted quiet. No people, no traffic, just me, a tent, and the woods. The drive to the site took about 4 hours, half of it on cracked asphalt and the rest on a dirt road that wound through tall pines. My plan was simple: hike about 3 miles down the trail, set up camp near the creek, fish a little, and just unwind. I had everything packed neatly: a small one-person tent, sleeping bag, food sealed in bear-proof containers, and a small cooler with some water and drinks. When I got there, I remember noticing how empty everything felt. No other cars near the trailhead, no tire tracks, no voices. Just the sound of wind moving through the trees and the creek in the distance. It wasn't strange, really. The season was over for most campers. Still, it gave me that weird, hollow feeling that comes when you realize you're completely alone miles away from anyone. I started hiking around noon. The trail was narrow, covered with fallen pine needles, and slightly damp from rain a day earlier. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. My boots crunched softly on the dirt, and every now and then I'd hear a woodpecker or a branch snap somewhere off the path. By the time I reached the spot I had marked on my GPS, the sun was sliding lower through the trees. The place was beautiful. The creek curved around a small flat area that was perfect for a tent. There were boulders by the water and a fallen tree that made a natural bench. I set up camp, collected some wood, and built a small fire before it got dark. Everything went smoothly. I ate a quick meal, sat by the fire for a while, and just listened to the water. The temperature dropped fast once the sun went down, and by the time I crawled into my sleeping bag, it must have been in the low 40s. I slept fine that first night, just the occasional sound of the wind. The next day went as planned. Fished for a while, read a book, wandered a bit upstream. It was peaceful, exactly what I wanted. By sunset, I had cooked up the last of the fish and packed everything back in its place. The quiet was heavier that night, though. It was the kind of silence that made you aware of every sound you made. It was around 10 p.m. when I first noticed something off. I had been lying in the tent, half asleep, when I heard movement. Not the small scurrying kind, not like a raccoon or squirrel. It was heavier, slow steps crunching leaves. First, I figured it was a deer. There were plenty of them out there, but the sound stopped too close, right outside the tent, maybe a few feet away. I froze. My first thought was bear. My food was sealed and hung up away from camp, but bears still wander anywhere they want. I reached for the bear spray beside me and waited, holding my breath. Nothing happened. The steps didn't continue, but I could hear faint breathing, slow, steady. It wasn't a snort or the kind of heavy puffing a bear makes. It sounded human. That realization made my chest tighten. I waited maybe 2 minutes before I unzipped the tent, just enough to peek out. The fire had burned low to a few glowing embers, and the woods beyond them were just a wall of black. I couldn't see anyone. I listened hard but heard nothing except the creek and the occasional drip of water from the trees. After a while, I convinced myself it was just my mind exaggerating sounds in the dark. I zipped up the tent and forced myself to try and sleep again, though I didn't sleep much at all. Every small sound had me wide awake. The next morning, I stepped outside early, breath showing in the cold air. I walked around the camp, checking the ground, half expecting to find animal prints. But near the edge of the site, by the creek, there were footprints, human ones.
Bootprints.
They weren't mine. I could tell because they were larger and the tread was different. They came from the trees and stopped near my tent, then turned back the same way. That's when I felt real unease set in. I kept trying to reason it out. Maybe a hiker had passed through and seen my firelight. Maybe they were just curious. But what kind of hiker walks up to someone's tent at night, stands there, then leaves without saying anything? I told myself to stay calm. I packed up some gear, decided to move closer to the main trail. I didn't want to leave entirely, but I didn't want to be tucked so deep in the trees anymore either. I hiked for maybe an hour and found a more open area near a bend in the creek, closer to the trail. There were signs of old camps, flattened grass, rocks from previous fire pits. I set up again, made lunch, and tried to shake the feeling. The day went slow. I barely moved from camp. I just kept scanning the tree line. Every rustle made me tense. That night, I kept the fire going longer. The air was colder. The sky was clear. I sat with my back to the fire, facing the woods. It was past midnight when I saw light between the trees. Faint, white, moving, like a flashlight. It was maybe 100 yards away, slowly weaving between trunks, then stopping. I watched it for what felt like forever. It didn't move closer, just stayed there, then vanished. I didn't sleep at all after that. At sunrise, I made up my mind to leave. My nerves were shot. I packed everything, stuffed the tent without even folding it right, and started back toward the trailhead. The woods felt different that morning. The quiet had weight to it, and I couldn't shake the thought of someone watching me. About halfway back, I saw something that froze me mid-step. On a tree, just off the trail, there was a small piece of bright orange fabric tied around a branch, the same color as the cord I used to tie my bear bag. I checked my pack. The cord was still there, but one piece from the end was missing. Someone had cut a section off. I don't know when they did it. My throat went dry, and I remember turning in circles, scanning the trees. I didn't see anyone, but from that moment until I reached my car, I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. Every noise made me flinch. When I finally reached the parking area, the sun was up, and I thought I was in the clear, but then I saw it. On the driver's side door of my car, there was a handprint, faint, smudged, like someone had pressed their palm against the dusty metal. It wasn't mine. My hands were smaller, and I hadn't touched that side when I unloaded. I unlocked the door, got in, and didn't look back once. I drove all the way back to Billings without stopping except for gas. I remember sitting in the car in my driveway for a while, engine off, just listening to the silence. I didn't call the police. What would I even tell them? That someone had watched me at night and tied a piece of my own cord to a tree? They'd think I was imagining it. I never went camping alone again after that. Sometimes, though, when I think back, I realize something that chills me more than anything else. Whoever that was, they must have been close enough to my tent that first night to take the cord, and I never heard them. Not once. The woods have their own kind of silence, one that hides everything if it wants to. And out there, miles from anyone, it's not ghosts or monsters you should be scared of. It's people, quiet, patient people who know how to move through the dark better than you do. It was late summer of 2018 when I decided to take a short solo camping trip in southern France. I had been living in Lyon for almost a year then, working a job that kept me indoors most days. I missed fresh air and silence. I wanted a quiet weekend where I could sit by a fire, cook simple food, and fall asleep to the sound of nature. I picked a small riverside spot near the Ardèche region, not too far from Valenpont-d'Arc. I had been there once before with friends, but this time I wanted to be alone. The area was peaceful, open land surrounded by low, forested hills. A narrow dirt road led down to a wide river bend where I could set up my tent close to the water but still sheltered by trees. I drove out early Friday morning, stopped in a small town for groceries, and reached the site around 2 p.m. It was warm, maybe 26 degrees Celsius, with soft wind rolling through the trees. The air smelled faintly of pine and river stones. I parked my small hatchback on the dirt patch, unpacked my things, and pitched the tent. I brought a folding chair, a small grill, and my camera. The spot felt perfect. Not too isolated, but far enough from the main trail that I couldn't hear cars or people. By evening, I had made myself dinner, some sausages and bread, cooked over a small fire. The sky dimmed slowly, turning orange behind the hills. I sat by the water and watched the reflection of the sky ripple over the current. It was quiet except for the rustle of insects. Around 9 p.m., I packed my food away and zipped up the tent. The night was darker than I expected, but I wasn't scared. Not yet. At some point, I woke up in the middle of the night. I don't know what time it was, but the air had turned colder. The wind had died completely. Everything was still. My bladder was pressing, so I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. When I stepped out, my breath fogged in the beam of light. The river made a soft, slow sound, the kind you only notice when everything else is silent. I walked a few meters away toward the bushes. I remember thinking how dark it was. No moon, just the faint silver of stars. That's when I saw movement on the other side of the river. It was subtle at first, like someone shifting weight or stepping between trees. My light flickered across the water, but the beam was weak at that distance. I could make out a shape, tall, thin, just standing there. It looked like a man. I thought maybe it was another camper, but the odd thing was he wasn't moving. He was just standing there, facing the river, directly across from me. I turned off my flashlight for a second, thinking maybe the reflection was making shapes, but when my eyes adjusted, I could still see the silhouette. It didn't move, even when I stood still for what felt like a full minute. My stomach tightened. I decided not to stare. I zipped myself back in the tent and lay down, pretending nothing had happened. My heart wouldn't slow down for a long time, though. I could still picture the figure, tall, unmoving, watching the water in silence. When morning came, I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe just a local fisherman or a hiker who had stopped there for the night. The daylight made everything look normal again. I made coffee, cooked some eggs, and went for a short walk upriver. The forest smelled fresh after dew. I saw a few boot prints near the shore, not mine, but they could have belonged to anyone. Still, the thought of someone standing there all night bothered me. I decided to stay one more night and then leave early Sunday morning. The second evening, the sky turned cloudy. The air felt heavier, like rain might come. Around 6 p.m., I noticed something strange. Across the river, near where I had seen that man, there was a small makeshift structure. At first, I thought it was just piled wood or rocks, but when I looked closer through my camera lens, I realized it was a little lean-to made of branches and cloth. The kind of thing someone might build if they were living rough out here. That made me uneasy. I hadn't heard any other campers or cars all day. No voices, no signs of people. But clearly, someone was staying across the river. As the sun went down, I tried not to focus on it. I cooked dinner again and tried to distract myself with a book. Around 9:30, the air grew damp, and I could smell rain in the distance. I packed my food away carefully and doused the fire so it wouldn't draw attention. The night dragged on slowly. Every sound outside felt sharper. The crunch of twigs, the shifting of the wind through trees. Around 11 p.m., I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was the faint crack of branches from the direction of the river, but closer, much closer than before. I froze. I turned off my flashlight and sat still, trying to listen. The sound came again. Slow, deliberate footsteps. They were on my side of the river now. I could hear the water running faintly, and behind it, the soft rhythm of someone walking along the dirt near my car. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My tense fabric felt paper thin, like it wouldn't protect me from anything. The steps stopped a few meters away. Then, nothing. Just the steady hum of crickets and my heart pounding in my ears. I sat there for maybe half an hour, not daring to make a sound. Eventually, I heard the steps again, this time moving away, slowly crunching back toward the river. After a while, silence returned. I stayed awake until dawn, gripping the small camping knife I always kept near my sleeping bag. When light finally came, I unzipped the tent carefully and looked around. The grass near my car was flattened in two spots. Clear footprints, large ones pressed deep in the soil. They circled near my car and then led toward the riverbank. I followed them until they disappeared near the water's edge. I looked across the river again. The makeshift structure I'd seen before was gone. Just scattered branches and torn cloth lying in the mud. That was enough for me. I packed up everything within an hour. My hands shook as I rolled the tent. I didn't bother making breakfast. Before leaving, I noticed something else that still makes my stomach twist even now. On the driver's side mirror of my car, smeared faintly across the glass, was the shape of a handprint. It was streaked with mud, but long and narrow, like someone had rested their hand there while leaning in. I got in the car and drove out of there fast, bouncing over the dirt road until I reached the paved one. I didn't stop until I was back in the nearest town. I sat in a parking lot outside a bakery, trying to steady my breathing. Later that day, I told myself maybe it was just a homeless man, someone living out there alone, maybe scavenging or curious about my camp. I didn't report it. It didn't feel like a crime, just something strange, something that didn't belong. But what unsettled me most was how quiet he had been, how close he'd gotten without me hearing him cross the water. I never camped alone again after that. Sometimes, when I drive near forests or rivers, I still find myself glancing across the water, half expecting to see a tall, still figure standing on the other side, watching silently. And every time I do, I remember that night. The cold air, the muddy handprint, and the feeling of being truly, completely alone, except for someone who didn't want to be seen. It was late October 2017, somewhere in northern Colorado. I was 31 then, and after a long few months at work, I decided to take a solo weekend trip into the mountains. I'd done plenty of camping before, so I wasn't nervous. I wanted a quiet weekend, away from the noise of people and my phone. The weather had been mild all week, though a cold front was supposed to roll in by Sunday. That didn't bother me. I packed my tent, sleeping bag, small propane stove, a hatchet, and enough food for 2 days. I left early Friday morning before sunrise. The drive was peaceful, the air getting thinner and cooler as the road climbed higher into the forest. I reached a remote clearing around noon. No campsites, no markers, just forest and silence. I picked a spot near a small creek, where the sound of running water would cover the quiet at night. I set up my tent under a line of tall pines, gathered some wood, and took a short hike up a ridge nearby. From up there, I could see miles of thick green forest, no smoke, no trails, nothing man-made. Felt good. I stayed up there until the light began to fade, then made my way back down before dark. As night fell, I built a small fire. The temperature dropped quickly, and the smell of pine mixed with smoke hung in the air. I ate a simple meal, canned beans and jerky, and sat by the fire until I started feeling tired. The forest around me was alive with sound. Crickets, the rustle of wind through the trees, the occasional crack of something falling somewhere in the dark. It wasn't frightening at first. Felt natural. When I crawled into my tent, I was warm, tired, and content. Sometime in the night, I woke up to a faint sound, something like heavy steps in the brush. I lay still, listening. The fire had died down to faint orange coals. I thought maybe it was a deer or a raccoon. The steps were slow, dragging through the leaves, pausing now and then. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. Whatever it was stopped just outside the range of the dim light from the fire. I could hear breathing, slow, uneven, then silence. After what felt like a long time, I unzipped the tent a few inches and peered out. The firelight flickered over the trees, but I didn't see anything. just the edge of the woods, still and dark. I listened for a few minutes longer, then convinced myself it was an animal and went back to sleep. The next morning, the air was damp and cold. A thin layer of fog hung low between the trees. I walked around the area, checking the ground. About 20 feet from my tent, I found tracks. Not boot prints, but bare footprints. The ground was soft with mud near the creek, and the prints were clear, human-sized but wider, heavier. I crouched there for a long time, staring at them. I tried to come up with something logical. Maybe some hiker had wandered through in the night, though it didn't make sense. No lights, no sound, no reason to be there barefoot. Still, I brushed it off. I told myself maybe they were old, maybe just distorted animal prints. I packed up a few things and decided to spend most of the day exploring the ridge again. By afternoon, the weather started changing. The wind picked up, and the temperature dropped fast. I could smell rain coming. I hiked back and gathered extra firewood before the storm hit. The first drops started falling just as I got the fire going. The rain turned heavy quickly, cold and steady, soaking through the trees and into the ground. I stayed inside the tent, wrapped in my sleeping bag, listening to the steady drumming of rain on the nylon. It was calming at first, but then I started hearing something else. Faint thuds, dull and irregular. I thought maybe branches falling, but the sound came from the same direction as before, from the tree line. The light outside faded faster than usual under the thick clouds. The forest turned almost black except for the glow of my small lantern inside the tent. I turned it off to save the battery and sat in the dark. The sound of the rain filled everything, but under it, there was movement again, soft, deliberate, moving closer. I could hear the wet ground squelch beneath each step. I reached for my flashlight, clicked it on, and shone it through the thin fabric of the tent. The light cast a faint glow outside, enough to see shadows shifting just beyond the tent wall. My stomach dropped. I unzipped the tent just enough to look through the small gap. The rain was heavy, blurring everything, but I could see movement, something standing near the fire pit. The coals had gone out hours ago, but there was a figure, human-shaped, standing still. It didn't move for several seconds. Then it stepped back into the trees. I stayed frozen, watching until I couldn't see it anymore. My hands were shaking, and my throat felt dry. I didn't leave the tent the rest of the night. I just sat there, listening. Every so often I'd hear faint crunches in the distance, then silence. When morning came, the rain had stopped, but everything was soaked. The ground was covered in mud, and the fog was thicker than before. I stepped outside slowly, scanning the area. The first thing I noticed was the tracks again, clearer this time, circling my tent. I counted at least 4 separate prints, all barefoot. Some were deep, as if the person, or whatever it was, had stood there for a long time. My stomach turned cold. I decided to pack up right away. I didn't care about breakfast or staying another night. I just wanted to leave. As I packed, I noticed something hanging from a low branch near the creek. At first, I thought it was a strip of bark, but when I got closer, I saw it was fabric, part of a torn shirt, faded and dirty. There were faint stains on it, maybe mud, maybe something else. It looked like it had been there a while, tangled around the branch. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it for a moment before turning back toward my tent. My nerves were raw, every sound making me flinch. By the time I got everything packed, the fog had thickened so much I could barely see 20 feet ahead. I followed the creek downstream, thinking it would lead back to the road eventually. The silence was heavier now. Even the birds were quiet. My boots sank into the mud as I walked. Every now and then, I'd glance back and think I saw something pale between the trees. Maybe a face, maybe just the light hitting the mist. I kept walking faster. After maybe an hour, I reached a slope that looked familiar, the same ridge I'd climbed the first day. Relief hit me, but it didn't last long. As I started down, I saw another footprint, fresh in the wet ground. The same wide, bare print. It was facing the direction I had just come from, as if something had been following me, matching my path. I didn't stop again. I just kept going, sliding and stumbling down the ridge until I reached the dirt road where my truck was parked. The truck was covered in a layer of wet leaves, untouched, but there were muddy prints on the driver's side door. Smudged, unclear, but there. I jumped inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the keys. The drive down the mountain felt like it took hours. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station near the main highway. When I stepped out, I realized how tense my body was, like I'd been holding my breath for days. I told myself maybe it was some local, maybe a hunter who liked to mess with people camping alone. But deep down, I knew the way those prints circled the tent, the way whoever it was stood there in the rain. It wasn't some joke. It felt deliberate, patient. I never went back to that part of Colorado again. A week later, I read a local article online about a missing man, a hiker last seen months before in the same forest area. They'd found some of his belongings scattered near a creek, but no body. The photo of his torn blue shirt looked just like the piece of fabric I'd seen hanging from that branch. Every time it rains now, I still hear that slow, wet sound of footsteps in the mud. I don't camp alone anymore. I don't even go near the woods at night. And sometimes, when I wake up in the dark and hear the rain against my window, I catch myself holding my breath, listening for that sound again. It was October 2017 when I decided to go camping alone in the desert of northern Arizona. I had been driving from Flagstaff to Page, chasing sunsets and quiet places to get away from everything for a weekend. I was 26 back then, and I liked being out where it felt like the whole world was asleep. I'd done a few solo camping trips before, but never this deep into Navajo land. There were signs along the dirt road that warned travelers not to go off trail, but I figured it was meant for tourists. I had a 4-wheel drive truck, extra fuel, and enough food and water for 3 days. The air was dry, the sky a flat gray before dusk, and the wind had that sharp edge that tells you winter isn't far off. I stopped around 5 p.m. when I found a flat, open patch of dirt near a line of low red rocks. It looked like a perfect spot to set up. I pitched my tent next to my truck, made a small fire with some driftwood I'd gathered, and set up my small propane stove for later. The silence around me felt thick. No birds, no bugs, nothing. Just the wind brushing over the sand and the occasional sound of my fire crackling. As the sun dropped, the whole desert turned orange and then quickly to dark red. I remember sitting there, eating from a tin of chili and watching the last light fade behind the rocks. That's when I noticed something odd. A shape in the distance, far across the open ground. It looked like a deer, maybe half a mile away, standing perfectly still. Its head was turned toward me. I didn't think much of it at first, but even after a few minutes, it didn't move. Not an inch, just standing there, stiff, like it was waiting for something. I got up, walked around my fire, and when I looked again, it was gone. I told myself it must have walked off when I wasn't looking. Still, something about the stillness of it bothered me. Animals don't stand that still for that long. When the sky finally went black, I threw more wood into the fire and zipped myself into my sleeping bag. The wind had died down, leaving the air silent again. I could hear the faint hum of my truck cooling beside me. I must have fallen asleep around 10. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy steps circling around the tent. My first thought was that it was an animal, a coyote maybe, but these footsteps weren't light or quick. They sounded like someone walking barefoot on gravel, crunching slow, deliberate. My heart started pounding, and I held my breath, trying to listen. The steps moved behind the tent, then stopped. I didn't move. I didn't even unzip the bag. I just lay there, staring into the darkness above me. Then I heard a sound, soft breathing, just outside the thin nylon wall. I could hear it exhale. I remember every muscle in my body locking up. The sound was human, no doubt, but it was uneven, raspy, almost like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. I waited, not daring to move. The breathing went quiet, and after what felt like forever, I finally heard it walk away. The crunch of the dirt faded off into the distance. I didn't sleep again that night. I just waited for light. When the sun came up, I got out and looked around. There were footprints in the dirt, bare feet. The ground was hard-packed, so they weren't clear, but I could see the general shape, long and narrow, with deep heel marks. Whoever it was had walked around the tent twice. I should have packed up and left then. But I told myself maybe it was some local passing through, maybe curious. I stayed another night, though I felt uneasy all day. Every sound made me flinch. The wind, the creak of my truck cooling in the sun, even the crunch of my own boots. That evening, I went to gather more wood from near the rocks. As I climbed up a bit, I saw something hanging from a branch of a dead tree. A piece of fur, long and coarse, like a strip of animal hide, torn and hanging loose. It didn't look fresh, but it also didn't look like it had been there long. When I touched it, it was stiff but not dried out completely. I felt something in my gut twist. Back at camp, I kept the fire high, refusing to let it die down. I didn't eat. I just sat there staring out into the dark. Around 9 p.m., I heard a noise again. Something far off at first, a kind of low scream or wail, not an animal I could recognize. It wasn't loud, but it carried far through the empty space. Then silence again. My chest felt tight, and I started thinking about driving out right then. But the desert road was rough, and I didn't want to risk blowing a tire in the dark. I told myself I'd leave first thing in the morning. Later that night, I heard it again, the footsteps. Same slow, dragging steps around the tent. I sat up this time, holding the small hatchet I kept by my sleeping bag. The sound stopped. Then I heard something brushing against the side of the tent, low and close to the ground. The fabric shifted slightly inward, like something pressing against it from outside. My breathing got shallow. I couldn't tell if it was an animal crawling or a person lying down beside the tent. Then came that breathing again, closer this time, a wheezing sound. I could hear it move slowly along the tent, pausing near where my head was. I clenched the hatchet tighter, my palms sweating so bad I thought I'd drop it. Then something scraped across the fabric, a long dragging sound like a fingernail or a stick being pulled slowly down. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent in one motion, ready to swing. The light hit nothing, just open sand and darkness. But then, just beyond the glow of the light, maybe 20 feet away, something stood. It looked like a man, but its posture was all wrong. Bent forward, arms hanging strangely low, head tilted to one side. Its skin looked pale under the light, and for a second, I thought it was wearing some kind of mask. Then it moved, jerky, too fast, and dropped out of view behind the rocks. I ran straight to the truck, threw everything inside without packing properly, and turned the ignition. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the keys twice. When the engine finally caught, I hit the gas and drove off the dirt patch, not caring where the road was. I just wanted distance. I drove until sunrise, the tires bouncing hard off the uneven trail. I didn't stop until I reached a small gas station near Cameron. My whole body felt wired, like I hadn't taken a full breath in hours. I stepped out and saw the back of my truck in daylight. Dirt smeared across the tailgate, long streaks like handprints dragged along it. I didn't report anything. Who would I even tell? I told myself it was some lunatic out there, maybe a hermit or someone high on something. But what keeps me up even now is that I never saw any footprints near the truck that morning. Not a single one leading away. For a long time after that, I couldn't shake the memory of how it moved, the way it seemed too wrong to be human yet too deliberate to be an animal. People tell stories about things out there, things that wear skin that isn't theirs. I used to laugh at that, but after that night, every time I think back, every detail feels sharper. The smell of the air, the weight of the silence, the way that breathing sounded just inches away. I sold that tent a week later. Haven't gone camping alone since. Sometimes, when I drive past that stretch of desert, I catch myself looking out at the red rocks, half expecting to see something standing still again, watching. It was early October of 2016 when I decided to go camping alone in the northern part of Idaho. I was 28 then, and I'd been trying to get away from work stress for weeks. I picked a spot near Priest Lake, not too far from the Canadian border, deep inside a forest that looked untouched by time. The weather forecast had mentioned possible rain, but I didn't care. I wanted peace, quiet, and some time to clear my head. I had camped alone before, so I wasn't too concerned. I packed my truck with my tent, a sleeping bag, a cooler of food, my hunting knife, a flashlight, and a small propane stove. By late afternoon, I reached a small dirt road that led into the woods. The road was rough, filled with potholes, wet leaves, and broken branches. It was the kind of place where cell service disappeared completely. The air was damp, and the forest smelled of pine and earth. I parked near a clearing by a small stream, maybe a 10-minute walk from the lake itself. The spot looked perfect, quiet, flat, and far enough from the water to stay dry. I set up my tent, gathered some dry wood, and lit a small fire before the sky started to darken. The first drops of rain began just after sunset. They were light at first, tapping on the tarp like fingers. I sat by the fire, eating a can of chili, watching the woods grow darker around me. The smoke drifted low and heavy because of the humidity, and the forest seemed to muffle all sound except for the rain. No wind, no birds, just the steady dripping and the crackle of wet wood. By around 9, the rain got heavier. I put out the fire before it drowned itself and crawled into my tent. The nylon walls shook softly under the rain, and the sound was oddly calming. I lay on my back, staring at the top of the tent, listening to the rhythm of the drops. I must have drifted off for an hour or so before I woke up again. Not because of thunder or cold, but because of a sound I couldn't place. It wasn't the rain. It wasn't the stream either. It was slower, uneven, something moving outside. The kind of sound that instantly pulls you out of sleep. A crunch of wet leaves, a shuffle, then silence. I froze. My breathing felt too loud inside the tent. The rain covered some of the noise, but I could still hear something, or someone, walking. The steps were heavy, like boots pressing into mud. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, a deer maybe, or a bear. But something about the rhythm didn't match. It stopped and started again. It moved closer to the tent, then paused. My flashlight was right next to me, but I didn't dare turn it on. The light would have given away exactly where I was inside. So I stayed still, trying to control my breathing, listening as the steps circled the tent once. Then they stopped. For a long minute, there was nothing but rain. I could hear the water running off the tarp and dripping into the mud. I waited for the steps to fade away, but they didn't. The silence grew heavier, and I realized whoever or whatever was out there was just standing still, watching. I could feel it. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would give me away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard movement again. Slow, steady, fading away into the trees. I waited another 5 minutes before I dared to move. I quietly unzipped my sleeping bag, grabbed the flashlight, and pointed it at the tent wall, just enough to see its faint outline.
No shadow.
No movement. I listened again. Nothing but rain. I didn't sleep much after that. I lay there, eyes open, muscles tense, waiting for any sound to return. It must have been around 3 in the morning when I finally started to relax. The rain had turned to a soft drizzle by then. I told myself it had probably been an animal after all, just curious. I was half asleep when I heard it again, that same slow, deliberate crunch of steps. But this time it wasn't circling. It was approaching directly from the side of the stream. I could hear the squelch of mud and the occasional snap of a branch. Whoever it was, they were moving quietly but not quiet enough. The sound stopped right outside my tent. I could hear breathing now, faint but clear. Slow, steady breaths through the rain. Then something brushed against the side of the tent. A light touch, like a hand running along the fabric. I felt it drag from one end to the other. My whole body went rigid. I gripped my knife without realizing it. The figure outside stayed there, just a dark shape pressed faintly against the tent wall. Then it backed away slowly, and I heard steps again, retreating, fading into the forest. I didn't sleep after that. I waited until the faint light of dawn started to seep through the trees before unzipping the tent. Everything outside was soaked. The fire pit was half filled with muddy water. I scanned the ground around the tent. The first thing I noticed were footprints, not animal tracks, but clear boot prints. Large ones, fresh. They led from the direction of the stream, circled my tent twice, and disappeared back into the trees. I packed up in silence, barely eating anything. My hands shook the entire time. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just that heavy, wet air that follows a night of rain. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing at the tree line. No one was there, but that didn't make it feel any better. When I finally got to my truck, I noticed something else. A set of muddy handprints on the driver's side door. Big ones, smeared like someone had tried to open it during the night. I checked the locks, still sealed. Thank God. I started the engine and got the hell out of there without looking back. The drive back to town took nearly 2 hours, and I don't remember half of it. I just remember gripping the wheel so tight my fingers hurt. Once I reached a gas station with service. I called the local ranger office and told them what happened. They sent someone to check the site later that day. A few days after, a ranger called me back. He said they found the campsite, but the rain had washed away most of the prints. He mentioned that there had been reports over the past few months of a man seen wandering around the northern woods. No one local, just someone camping illegally, stealing food, and sleeping in abandoned cabins. They hadn't been able to catch him yet. That was the last I ever went camping alone. Sometimes, even now, I still think about that night. The sound of those steps, the dragging touch along the tent wall, the way it felt knowing someone was standing inches away from me while I lay there in the dark, pretending to be asleep. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't some creature. It was a person, and that somehow makes it a lot worse. It was late August of 2014 when I decided to spend a few days camping alone in a quiet part of northern Ontario. I was 27 then, working a job that kept me indoors most of the time, and I'd been craving some solitude, just trees, fresh air, and the kind of silence that feels like a reset button. I chose a spot about 30 kilometers north of a small town called Chapleau, deep in the woods, far enough that I'd have to drive along gravel roads for nearly an hour after leaving the main highway. I didn't plan on seeing another person the whole time, and that idea made me feel oddly calm. The area was known for being thick with spruce and birch, the kind of forest that looked almost untouched. I found a small clearing next to a narrow stream. The ground was soft with pine needles, and I set up my small tent facing the water. The air had that damp smell of soil and moss, the kind that seeps into everything. By late afternoon, I had a fire going, my gear unpacked, and I was sitting on a folding chair, listening to the water move over the rocks. The first day went quietly. I cooked a small meal on my camping stove and watched the sun drop behind the trees. By the time the forest got dark, everything went still except for the occasional sound of water or an owl calling somewhere far off. I remember thinking how clean the night air felt compared to the city. Sometime during that first night, I woke up for no clear reason. It was completely dark inside the tent, and I could hear the stream softly running nearby. What pulled me fully awake was the sound of something crunching through the woods. Slow, heavy steps. Not a deer, I could tell that much. The weight of each step was deliberate, uneven, and close. My heart started beating faster as I listened. The sound stopped somewhere just beyond the light of the dying fire. I held my breath, waiting, then nothing, just silence again. After several minutes, I told myself it could have been a raccoon or maybe a moose moving through the trees. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep, though I kept waking up to every small sound after that. The next morning, I walked around the area. There were faint impressions in the soft soil, not boot prints exactly, but definitely not animal tracks either. The ground was uneven with pine needles, so it was hard to tell. I brushed it off, ate breakfast, and spent most of the day hiking a few kilometers upstream. I saw no one, no other campsites, nothing that suggested anyone else had been nearby. That second night, I decided to keep the fire burning longer, throwing on extra wood before getting into my sleeping bag. Around midnight, I woke up again. This time, I didn't hear footsteps at first, just the faint clink of something metallic, like metal tapping on metal. It was coming from somewhere behind my tent. I froze. The air felt heavier, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then I heard slow movement again, circling around the camp. My mind went blank with fear. I didn't move. I just listened as it passed on the far side of the fire pit. I could hear the dry leaves crunching underfoot, careful, deliberate steps. Then the sound faded, swallowed by the distance and the trees. I stayed awake until dawn, my flashlight in hand, every muscle in my body tense. When the sun came up, I got out and walked around. The woods looked normal, calm, as if nothing had happened. But near one of the trees behind the tent, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. A small pile of stones stacked in a neat column, maybe 10 inches high. I hadn't done that. It hadn't been there the day before. I stared at it for a long time, trying to reason it out. Maybe some hiker had left it, but it looked fresh. The ground around it was disturbed, small scuffs in the soil, and one larger mark that looked like the toe of a boot had dragged. I decided to stay one more night, though I didn't feel as relaxed anymore. I spent the day fishing, trying to distract myself, but every sound from the forest made me turn my head. The feeling of being watched crept in slowly, like a weight I couldn't shake. By the time evening came, the woods looked darker than before. The air had cooled fast, and clouds had rolled in, covering the moon. I ate early, then sat near the fire, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. Around 9 p.m., I thought I saw movement between the trees on the opposite side of the stream. Just a shape, darker than the shadows, moving slightly. I stared for what felt like minutes, but it didn't move again. I went into my tent, zipped it closed, and lay there listening. Sometime after midnight, I heard the crunching again, closer this time, came right up to the edge of my camp. I could hear breathing, slow and rough, like someone trying to stay quiet but not quite managing. I felt my body freeze completely. The footsteps stopped just outside the tent, near the corner where my backpack was. Then came the sound of fabric brushing, something touching the side of the tent lightly, as if tracing the outline. I stayed perfectly still. The only thing between me and whoever it was were 2 layers of nylon. After a few seconds, the sound stopped, and I could hear slow steps moving away. The breathing faded, replaced again by the stillness of the forest. I didn't sleep at all after that. When daylight finally came, I stepped out cautiously. My backpack had been moved. It was sitting a few feet from where I'd left it, half open. Inside, nothing was missing, but the contents were rearranged. My flashlight on top, my knife pulled halfway from its sheath. I packed everything as fast as I could. I didn't even bother making breakfast. As I was breaking down the tent, I noticed something across the stream, right where I thought I'd seen movement the night before. It was another stack of stones, taller this time, with a small piece of cloth tied around one of them. I couldn't make out what kind of cloth it was, but it looked worn and dirty. I stood there staring for a long time, then realized that the trees behind it had faint marks on them, like scratches made with something sharp. By the time I got into my truck, my hands were shaking. I drove fast down that narrow dirt road, checking my mirrors every few minutes. At one point, I thought I saw someone standing far back along the tree line as I drove away, a figure just barely visible between the trunks. But I didn't stop to look. When I reached the main road, I finally felt like I could breathe again. I drove all the way back to town and checked into a small roadside motel, still dirty and exhausted. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the sounds, the breathing, the piles of stones, the feeling of something standing right outside the thin wall of my tent. I never found out who it was or why they were out there. Maybe it was some local living rough in the woods, maybe a hunter passing through, or maybe someone who just liked to watch campsites from the dark. Whatever it was, I knew I'd pushed my luck staying as long as I did. The next morning, I drove back home without looking back. I sold most of my camping gear a week later. I still go hiking sometimes, but only during the day and never alone. Every time I hear branches crack in the distance, a part of me goes right back to that night. Lying in the dark, knowing someone was standing just inches away, listening to me breathe. It was late September of 2014 when I decided to take a solo camping trip in northern Arizona. I was 28 then, living out of a small apartment in Flagstaff, and working too much to even remember what quiet felt like. The weather had started to cool down, and I thought a weekend away from my phone, from people, from everything, would clear my head. I packed light, just my old green tent, a sleeping bag, a small stove, and a backpack full of basic supplies. I planned to camp near the Mogollon Rim, far enough from any trails that I wouldn't run into anyone else. That was the point, to be completely alone for a while. I left early in the morning, taking my old Ford up a narrow Forest Service road that was barely used. The road was rough and full of loose rocks, the kind that rattle under your tires like bones. I parked in a clearing where the trees opened up just enough to see the distant rim of cliffs. It was quiet, just wind and the steady creak of tall pines moving against each other. No phone signal, no other cars. Exactly what I wanted. By the time I finished setting up my tent, the sun was already dipping behind the trees. The forest looked endless in every direction, layers of trunks and branches vanishing into the dark. I made a small fire, cooked a simple dinner out of canned chili, and sat there staring into the flames until it got too cold. There was something strange about the quiet that night. Normally, you hear crickets or the distant call of an owl, but that night the forest seemed drained of sound. Just the whisper of wind, nothing else. I told myself it was fine, that maybe it was just colder up here and most animals were bedding down. I crawled into my tent around 10, zipped myself in, and tried to sleep. I remember lying there for a long time, staring at the faint orange glow of the dying fire through the tent fabric. I kept thinking I heard small crunches outside, Light footsteps, like something circling my campsite. Probably a deer, I told myself. Maybe a raccoon. I kept my flashlight beside me, but I didn't bother checking. Eventually, I drifted off. I woke up suddenly around 2 a.m. It was dead silent, colder than before, and I had that uneasy feeling, the kind that sits in your stomach when something isn't right. I could hear faint breathing outside my tent, slow and steady, too heavy to be a small animal. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stayed still, barely breathing, listening. The breathing stopped after a few seconds, followed by a sound that still makes my skin crawl whenever I think about it. Soft shuffling steps, circling the tent, dragging through pine needles. I reached for my flashlight, hand shaking, and gripped the handle tight. I didn't unzip the tent. I just waited. Whatever it was stopped right at the back corner of my tent and stood there. I could feel its presence, like it was leaning in, listening for movement. Then I heard a faint click, like the sound of a twig breaking, followed by slow, deliberate steps walking away into the forest. I lay there for hours, too scared to move, until the first light of morning crept through the tent. When I finally stepped outside, I saw footprints. Not animal tracks, footprints. Bare, human ones, long and narrow, pressed deep into the dirt around the tent. There were at least 10 prints circling the tent and leading off into the trees. My stomach dropped. Whoever had been there had been barefoot, and judging by how fresh the prints looked, they were there maybe a few hours before dawn. I scanned the tree line, but there was nothing, just silence and fog hanging low through the pines. I wanted to pack up and leave right then, but I convinced myself maybe it was just some homeless person or hiker. It didn't explain why they were barefoot, but I was trying to rationalize it. I stayed another night, stupid, I know, but I didn't want to look like a coward running from nothing. I spent the day hiking nearby, sticking close to camp. Around noon, I noticed something strange about the trees about 30 yards away. The bark on a few of them had been stripped clean, like someone had scraped it off with a knife or their fingernails. On one of the trunks, there were marks, shallow scratches, too uneven to be tool-made. I ran my hand over them. The wood felt damp and rough, like it had been done recently. That evening, as the sun fell again, I rebuilt my fire and tried to keep myself occupied. I noticed how quickly the woods darkened there. One moment it was warm gold light filtering through the trees, and the next it was pitch black, the kind where your flashlight barely seems to cut through it. Around 9, I killed the fire and went into my tent. I kept my flashlight in my hand this time, and I didn't even bother trying to sleep. Around midnight, the noises started again. Slow, dragging steps through the dirt. I froze, listening as they came closer. Then, out of nowhere, there was a low groan, deep, almost human, but wrong somehow, like someone trying to imitate the sound of pain without understanding it. It circled again, moving in jerky bursts, stopping, then starting again. I could hear breathing, this time faster, uneven, almost like it was excited. I flicked on my flashlight and aimed it toward the front of the tent, right at the thin fabric. For a split second, I saw a shadow move past, tall, too thin, shoulders hunched at a strange angle. Then silence again. I sat there for what felt like an hour, clutching that light, my hand going numb. When I finally heard the sound of something sniffing near the tent flap, I nearly screamed. It was slow and heavy, almost like someone smelling through their nose after running. I stayed still. Then, the thing moved, brushing lightly against the side of the tent. Its outline was unmistakable. It looked human, but taller, limbs too long, its movements awkward, twitchy, like it didn't know how to move right. I could see the faint shadow of a head tilt, then stillness. I don't remember breathing. After a few minutes, the shape backed away and disappeared into the trees. I waited another hour before unzipping the tent, flashlight shaking in my grip. My fire was completely dead. The woods were pitch black. I shone the light around and caught a glimpse of something between the trees. A pale shape, crouched low, maybe 40 feet away, watching. The second the light touched it, it straightened and darted behind a tree faster than I could blink. I didn't move. I just stared at the spot until dawn broke. When morning finally came, I packed up everything in less than 10 minutes. I didn't eat, didn't even check to make sure I had everything. I just wanted to get out. When I walked around the campsite one last time, I saw more prints, bare feet, long strides, circling the area again. Some of them looked strange, like the toes were splayed wide apart, digging into the dirt. A few led off toward the ridge behind my camp, where the ground sloped into thicker forest. I followed them only for a few feet before I saw something hanging from a low branch, a scrap of fabric. It looked like part of a shirt sleeve, torn and sun-bleached, maybe from years ago. Beneath it was a small pile of animal bones, arranged neatly in a circle. That was enough for me. I turned and left without looking back. Took me almost an hour of hiking before I found my truck again. When I finally started driving, I didn't stop until I hit pavement. I looked at the time, it was barely 7 a.m. I remember my hands shaking on the steering wheel the whole drive back to town. That night, when I got home, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale shape crouched in the trees. I kept thinking about those footprints, about how quiet the forest was, how wrong it all felt. A few days later, I looked up old reports from that area. Missing campers, hikers who vanished near the rim. There were plenty. Some were never found. I never went camping alone again after that. I still like the forest, but now when I hear about people disappearing out there, I don't think about animals or getting lost. I think about what I saw that night. Something that moved like it was wearing a human body but didn't belong in one. Something that waits in the quiet parts of the woods where no one goes. And sometimes when I drive through northern Arizona, I still see those endless pine trees along the highway, and I wonder if somewhere out there in the dark, that thing still walks barefoot through the dirt, waiting for the next tent light to flicker on. It was early October 2019 when I decided to take a few days off work and head out hunting in the northern part of Wyoming. The air had just started to cool, the trees turning gold and orange, and the mornings carried that sharp kind of cold that woke you up better than any coffee. I had been planning this trip for months, a solo hunting and camping trip deep into the Bighorn Mountains. I wanted quiet, just the kind that comes when you're miles away from anyone else. No phones, no engines, no noise except wind and forest. I drove up early in the morning, my old silver pickup loaded with my rifle, gear, food, and a small canvas tent. The dirt road leading up the mountain was rough, filled with ruts from years of logging trucks and weather damage. By the time I reached the spot I had marked on my map, a clearing about 7 miles from the nearest trailhead, it was past noon. The place was perfect, a wide, flat area surrounded by tall pines and spruces, a small creek running close enough to hear but far enough that the ground stayed dry. I set up camp, built a small fire ring from rocks, and made sure my tent faced the trees so the morning light would hit it first. The first night was calm. The fire cracked quietly while I sat back in my folding chair, listening to the sounds of the woods settling in. I could hear a few night animals moving around, rabbits maybe or squirrels, and the distant hoot of an owl. It was peaceful, the kind of peace I had been looking for. The next day I woke up early, before sunrise. The sky was pale blue, and frost had settled over the grass around my tent. I packed my rifle and a small bag with jerky, water, and a compass, then headed toward the ridge a couple miles north where I had seen elk tracks the last time I was there. The woods were thick and quiet, only the crunch of my boots and the occasional rustle of leaves breaking the stillness. By mid-morning, I found some fresh signs, droppings, tracks, and a broken branch where something large had passed through. I followed for a while, moving slowly and carefully, but I didn't see anything. I stayed out until around 4 in the afternoon before heading back to camp. When I got close to camp, something felt off. I couldn't tell what exactly, it just looked different. My tent flap was open. I was sure I had zipped it shut before I left. I walked in carefully, but everything was still there. Sleeping bag, stove, flashlight, nothing missing. Could have been the wind, I told myself. The wind sometimes catches those old zippers. I brushed it off, made a small fire again, cooked a can of chili, and sat there until the sun went down. The night felt colder than the one before, and the woods seemed quieter. No crickets, no owls, just silence. I tried to ignore it, told myself I was just noticing things too much, being alone for too long. I went to sleep around 10, but woke up around 2 in the morning to a faint sound, like slow, heavy footsteps outside my tent. I froze, holding my breath. The steps stopped for a moment, then started again, closer this time, crunching the frost-covered ground. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I reached for my rifle beside me, my hand shaking a little. The sound stopped again. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then something brushed against the side of the tent. Light, like someone dragging a hand across the fabric. I stayed completely still. The sound moved slowly from one side of the tent to the other, then stopped. I waited, my eyes wide open, staring into the dark. After maybe a minute, I heard soft steps moving away, fading into the trees. I didn't sleep again that night. I just lay there, staring at the roof of the tent until the light started to come through in the morning. When I finally got up, I checked around camp. There were tracks in the dirt, human tracks. Not boots, not hiking shoes, bare feet. The prints were long and narrow, the toes spread wide like whoever it was had been walking barefoot for a long time. I felt sick looking at them. They came from the woods, circled the tent twice, then disappeared toward the creek. I followed them for a few yards but lost them once they hit the wet ground. I didn't see anyone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me that whole night. I thought about packing up right then, but I told myself it was probably some homeless person or a hiker who got lost. It was rare but not impossible. I stayed, though I kept my rifle closer that day. I didn't go far, just scouted the area around camp. Every now and then I thought I saw movement between the trees. A flicker of something pale, gone as soon as I focused on it. That night, I built my fire bigger and stayed up later. The flames threw long shadows across the clearing, and the dark beyond the light looked endless. Around midnight, I heard something again. Not footsteps this time, but the sound of something snapping a branch just beyond the edge of the firelight. I aimed my flashlight into the trees, but the beam caught nothing. I didn't sleep much again. Every sound outside made me flinch. Around 3, I heard water splashing down by the creek. It sounded like someone wading through it slowly. The water isn't deep, just knee-high at most, but the sound of it in the middle of the night, when everything else is silent, was almost unbearable. Then it stopped, and the woods went dead quiet again. At sunrise, I decided I'd had enough. I started packing right away, throwing things into the truck faster than I ever had before. I didn't even make breakfast. I just wanted out. When I went to take down my tent, I noticed something behind it, on the backside where the ground sloped slightly. There were marks in the dirt again, like someone had been kneeling or sitting there for a while. The dirt was pressed down, the grass flattened, and there were 2 small bones lying there. Looked like animal bones, maybe from a rabbit or squirrel, cleaned completely of meat. I got everything in the truck and started driving down the mountain road. The air was cold, and the early sunlight cut through the trees in long golden beams. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see someone walking behind me, but the road was empty. A few miles down, I stopped at a ranger station. an old wooden cabin with a metal sign out front. The ranger inside was an older guy, maybe in his 50s. I told him I'd been camping up near the creek by the North Ridge and that I'd found some tracks, maybe someone wandering around out there. He didn't seem too surprised. Said that over the past couple of years, people had reported strange encounters up there. Not dangerous exactly, but unsettling. A few hunters had come back early after hearing someone walking around their camps at night. He said there used to be an old cabin higher up the ridge, from the 1960s maybe, owned by a trapper who lived alone until he disappeared one winter. Nobody ever found him, just his tools and some animal bones scattered near the creek. After that, no one stayed up there for long. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, thanked him, and left. I drove straight home that day, not stopping for anything but gas. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. The sound of those slow, barefoot steps, the way something brushed the tent, the quiet after. I've gone hunting plenty of times since, but never alone again. I don't know who or what was out there that night, but I know this much: it wasn't an animal. It was a person, or what used to be one, living out there too long enough to forget what normal life feels like. And sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night and the house is quiet, I swear I can still hear those same slow steps. That sound of something moving just outside, circling, waiting for me to fall back asleep. It was the summer of 2016 when I decided to take a solo camping trip through the southern part of France. I had been traveling through Europe for a few months, and by the time I reached the countryside near the Cévennes National Park, I was craving quiet, something away from the noise of hostels, cities, and the endless stream of tourists. I wanted trees, silence, and a night under the open sky. The small town of Saint-Jean-du-Gard was my last stop before heading into the woods. I bought a few things from a local store: some bread, canned beans, a lighter, a small bottle of wine, and a map. I was 27 then, a little too confident about how well I could handle the outdoors. I found a trail that led into a dense stretch of forest with a few open patches near a small river. It seemed perfect. The air was heavy with the smell of pine and damp soil, and I could hear the distant buzz of insects even though the sun hadn't fully set. By evening, I had found a good spot, a clearing about half a kilometer from the dirt road. The grass was soft, and the sound of running water nearby made it peaceful. I pitched my small gray tent and gathered some dry branches for a fire. The forest around me was calm, and the only movements I saw were rabbits darting through the undergrowth. Everything felt still, quiet, and comfortable. I cooked a simple meal over the small fire, watched the flames flicker, and sipped from my bottle of wine. The night was darker than I expected, the kind of blackness that makes you realize how far away you are from any form of civilization. No light pollution, no distant cars, just endless dark trees and the faint glow of my campfire. It must have been close to midnight when I noticed the first strange thing. I was lying inside my tent, listening to the forest sounds, when I heard something. A faint crack of a branch breaking, then another. It was distant but distinct. I froze, thinking it was maybe a deer, but the sound didn't move like an animal's steps. It was slower, heavier. One step, pause, another step. It came from the direction of the trail I had used earlier. I held my breath, trying to listen closely. The noise stopped. Then, for about 5 minutes, there was nothing. Just the soft hum of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. I told myself it was probably nothing and tried to sleep. But around 20 minutes later, I heard it again. This time closer. The sound of footsteps, slow, dragging, like someone walking carefully on uneven ground. I sat up inside my tent, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I tried to peek through the small mesh window, but it was too dark outside. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and my campfire had burned down to faint orange coals. The footsteps stopped just before reaching the edge of the clearing. Then silence. I waited, barely breathing. For the next minute or two, I could feel something or someone out there watching. Then came the sound of something brushing against a tree trunk. Slow scraping, like fabric sliding across rough bark. I didn't move for the rest of the night. I stayed sitting upright in my sleeping bag, knife in hand, eyes fixed on the dim outline of the tent wall. I didn't hear anything else after that. Eventually, sometime before dawn, exhaustion took over and I fell asleep sitting up. When I woke, sunlight was spilling through the trees. Everything looked normal again. The forest was bright, birds were chirping, and the ground outside looked undisturbed. I stepped out and checked around, no footprints, no sign of anything unusual. Still, I felt uneasy. I decided I'd stay one more night and leave early the next morning. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks in the dark. The day passed quietly. I went down to the river, washed my face, and spent most of the afternoon reading. But every now and then, I'd look toward the trail, half expecting to see someone standing there. No one came. By evening, I felt calm enough to light another fire and cook dinner. But when the sun started to drop again, that same feeling returned, a kind of low tension building in my stomach. I didn't eat much. I just sat near the fire, watching the light fade, until darkness swallowed the forest again. It was around 10 p.m. when I noticed a faint glow between the trees, far down the trail. It looked like the flicker of a flashlight. It would appear for a few seconds, then vanish. Appear again, then move slowly closer. I turned off my headlamp and crouched near my tent, trying to make sense of it. After a minute, I realized it wasn't a steady light. It was moving like someone carrying a small lantern or phone flashlight, swinging side to side. Whoever it was, they were walking slowly toward my direction. My chest tightened. There was no reason for anyone to be out here this late, especially coming from the direction I'd come from. The road was miles away. I backed into my tent, zipped it halfway, and waited. The light stopped again, maybe 50 or 60 meters away. I could faintly hear footsteps and what sounded like slow breathing. It wasn't an animal. It was a person. Then the light turned off. Complete darkness again. I didn't sleep that night either. Every small sound felt like it was coming closer. Once or twice, I thought I heard whispering or faint movement in the brush, but it was too quiet to be sure. I stayed still until the sky began to turn gray. When the first bit of daylight came, I packed everything as fast as I could. My hands were shaking as I folded the tent, stuffed it into my pack, and started heading down the trail back toward the road. The walk back should have taken about an hour, but it felt much longer. Every sound made me turn my head. The woods were empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. About halfway down, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. On the side of the trail, near a fallen tree, there was a small piece of white fabric hanging from a branch, like part of a torn shirt or bag. I didn't touch it. A few steps later, I found boot prints in the damp soil, fresh ones, larger than mine, heading in the same direction I had come from the night before. When I finally reached the road, I almost laughed from relief. I walked back towards St. Jean du Gard as fast as I could, barely stopping until I reached the town. I booked a small room in a roadside inn and stayed there for the rest of the day, not even going out for food. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering who that person was and what they were doing out there. The next morning, I went to a small cafe near the bus stop. The owner, an older man, asked where I'd been camping. I told him the general area near the old trail by the river. He gave me a strange look and said something about avoiding that part of the woods because some weird people sometimes stayed there, people who lived off the grid in the hills far from anyone. I didn't ask for more details. I just nodded, finished my coffee, and took the first bus heading east. Even now, years later, I can still picture that faint light moving through the trees, the sound of careful footsteps in the dark, and the quiet breathing just beyond my campfire's edge. Sometimes I think maybe it was nothing dangerous, maybe just some hermit or someone wandering the woods. But every time I remember how that light went out right when it got close to my camp, my stomach knots up. I've camped plenty of times since then, but never alone. And whenever I think about France, it's not the wine or the scenery that comes to mind. It's that stretch of black forest and the sound of someone walking slowly toward me in the night, never showing their face. I was 26 when I decided to spend a weekend alone in the woods near Burnt Creek, a quiet stretch of forest about 2 hours outside of Missoula, Montana. I'd been working long weeks at a small construction company and felt burnt out. I just wanted silence, trees, and the kind of air you only get when you're far from everything. It was early September. The weather had cooled but hadn't yet turned cold, and the forecast showed clear skies with a chance of rain late in the weekend. I packed up my old green tent, a sleeping bag, my small propane stove, and enough food for 3 days. I parked my truck at the end of a dirt road that led off Highway 93 and hiked in for about an hour before finding a decent clearing near a bend in the creek. The area was perfect. Flat ground, surrounded by pines and cottonwoods, and close enough to the creek that I could hear the steady rush of water, but not so close that I'd risk flooding if it rained. The sun was still high when I finished setting up camp. I built a small fire ring with stones, gathered some dry wood, and got water boiling for coffee. Everything felt quiet, clean, and still. The woods stretched endlessly around me. No people, no cars, just the occasional crack of a branch somewhere deeper in the trees. As the day went on, I wandered along the creek and found old tracks. Deer mostly, but also a few human boot prints half filled with water. I figured they were from another camper or a hunter, though I hadn't seen a single truck parked near the road when I came in. That didn't bother me. These woods were public land, and it wasn't unusual to find signs of other people. I spent the evening cooking beans and sausage in a small pan, watching the orange light fade off the trees. By the time I crawled into my sleeping bag, it was cool enough that I could see my breath. The forest outside my tent made soft, shifting noises. Leaves brushing, the distant creek, an occasional owl, but nothing felt off. I slept fine that night. The next day, things felt different. It started with the weather. The morning sky was pale gray and heavy, and the air smelled like rain. I ate breakfast standing up, watching a fog roll low through the trees. I was planning to hike up the ridge behind my camp to get a view of the valley, but something made me hesitate. It wasn't fear, just a sense that the woods felt heavier than before, quieter in a strange way. I brushed it off, grabbed my backpack, and went anyway. The trail up the ridge wasn't a real trail, more like a deer path cutting through brush. It was steep and slick from moisture. About halfway up, I found an old campsite. Collapsed tent poles, a rusted metal cup, a few torn pieces of tarp tangled in roots. It looked like someone had left in a hurry or maybe just abandoned it after years of weathering. The weird thing was, it didn't look that old. The ground still had faint marks where something heavy had sat. I tried not to think too much about it and kept climbing. By the time I reached the top, the fog had thickened so much I could barely see the trees 20 feet ahead. I sat down on a rock and ate a sandwich. The forest was completely still now. Not even birds. The silence made me uneasy, so I decided to head back before it started raining. Going downhill was slower than I expected because the ground had gotten muddy, and at one point, I slipped and slid several feet before catching myself on a branch. When I stood up, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. A set of fresh boot prints leading down the same path I'd just come up. They weren't mine. The soles were wider with a square pattern, maybe work boots or hiking boots. I looked around, but the fog was so thick it swallowed everything past the nearest trees. I called out just to make sure someone wasn't nearby, but my voice fell flat in the damp air. No answer. I kept walking, moving faster now. The prince followed the same direction as me, heading straight down toward my camp. When I got back to the clearing, everything looked normal at first glance. The tent was still there, my gear untouched. But something small and strange caught my eye. My hatchet, which I'd left buried in a log by the fire pit, was gone. I checked around, thinking maybe I'd misplaced it, but it wasn't anywhere. My stomach turned a little. Maybe some hiker had passed through, seen my camp, and borrowed it for firewood. I told myself that, though it didn't really make sense. That night, it started raining hard. I sat inside the tent listening to the sound of water drumming on the nylon, the wind pushing through the trees, the distant rush of the creek. It was the kind of storm that made you feel completely cut off. Around midnight, I woke up because I thought I heard something outside, footsteps in the mud. They were slow, uneven, like someone walking carefully around the edge of my camp. The rain made it hard to tell, but I was sure it wasn't an animal. The sound stopped after a minute or two, and I lay there frozen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I told myself it was just branches falling or water dripping heavy from the trees, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the ground was soaked. I stepped out and looked around. There were footprints, human ones, around the fire ring circling my tent. The same square pattern soles I'd seen on the ridge. The tracks led off toward the woods, then disappeared into the mud near the creek. I felt a wave of cold go through me. Someone had been there while I was sleeping. I decided I wasn't staying another night. I packed up fast, shoving wet gear into my backpack. But when I reached for my food bag that I'd hung from a tree, it was gone. The rope was cut clean, not chewed. Whoever had been there had taken it. That told me two things: they were human and they had a knife. The hike back to the truck felt endless. The woods looked darker now, every tree the same, the fog creeping in again as if the forest wanted to close around me. Several times I stopped because I thought I heard movement behind me. Branches snapping, the sound of boots on wet ground. But when I turned, there was nothing. I kept moving faster each time. When I finally reached the dirt road, I felt some relief. My truck was parked about a quarter-mile down, hidden behind some trees. I started walking toward it, but as I came around the bend, I froze. There were tire tracks next to mine, fresh ones deep in the mud from a different vehicle. My passenger door was open. My chest went tight. I walked slowly, scanning the area. The truck's interior was torn apart. The glove box open, my backpack half empty on the seat, the rest of my food gone. Even the small cooler in the back had been flipped and emptied. There were muddy footprints near the driver's side door, the same square pattern again. I didn't waste time. I started the truck and drove, fast, barely caring about the mud flying behind me. I didn't stop until I hit pavement again. I pulled over at a gas station in Lolo, shaking so bad I could barely hold my coffee. Later that week, I reported it to the sheriff's department. They sent a deputy out there but said they didn't find anything. Just some old footprints washed out by rain and a bit of trash near the creek. They told me it was probably just a transient or a poacher passing through, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Whoever it was, they'd been watching. They'd followed my trail down the ridge, crept up to my tent in the rain, and walked circles around me while I slept. Then they'd gone through my things like they were testing how far they could go. I haven't been camping alone since that weekend. Sometimes, late at night when it rains, I still hear that slow, steady crunch of footsteps outside my tent in my head. It's not the noise that haunts me. It's the thought of how close they must have been, standing there in the dark, just watching. And the worst part is knowing they never took anything valuable at first. Not the gear, not the tools, just the hatchet. Like they wanted to keep it. For what, I don't even want to think about. It had been raining since late afternoon when I pulled into the small dirt clearing just off a narrow forest road in northern Oregon. It was early October of 2019, and the air carried that wet, earthy smell that always came before a storm. I was 32 at the time, camping alone for a long weekend to get away from the noise of my job and the city. I had planned this trip for weeks. Just me, my truck, and the thick pine woods that stretched for miles in every direction. By the time I parked, the rain had started to come down harder. I stepped out into the cold air, the sky already turning that deep blue-gray that comes before night. The ground was soft and slick, and the sound of rain hitting the leaves above was steady, like 1,000 small hands drumming in rhythm. I found a relatively flat spot near a cluster of tall firs and set up my tent there. The mud clung to my boots, and by the time I got the poles up and the tarp staked down, water was already dripping from my jacket sleeves. Inside the tent, I had a sleeping bag, a foam pad, my backpack, and a small lantern. Everything smelled faintly of damp nylon and the woods. I heated up a can of chili on my small propane stove under the edge of the tarp, the smell of it mixing with the sharp scent of rain and pine needles. I ate quickly, watching the last bit of daylight fade through the trees. The forest went quiet in that strange way it does before total darkness. No birds, no wind, just the sound of water hitting everything. By around 8, it was pitch black outside. The rain hadn't slowed at all. I sat inside the tent, wrapped in my sleeping bag, listening to it hit the tarp like hundreds of tiny pebbles. Every now and then I'd hear a heavy drop slide down and slap against the side of the tent. I wasn't scared, just aware of how alone I was. The nearest town was maybe 20 miles away, and I hadn't seen another car on the forest road for hours. Sometime around 9, I turned off the lantern and tried to sleep. The rain kept up, and I could feel the cold seeping up from the wet ground underneath. My mind kept wandering, to work, to the long drive home, to random things I hadn't thought about in years. Every time I started to drift off, the rain would shift its rhythm or a gust of wind would rattle the branches outside. Then, after a while, I started hearing something different. It wasn't rain. It was dull, rhythmic, like soft footsteps in the mud outside the tent. At first, I thought I imagined it. I stayed still, breathing shallow, listening. The steps stopped, then started again, slow, deliberate, not the random scurry of an animal. They sounded like someone walking carefully through wet leaves. I told myself it was probably a deer, maybe an elk. This was their territory. But the steps came closer, circling slowly around where my tent was pitched. The sound of wet ground squishing under weight was clear now. I could hear the water moving beneath each step. I stayed completely still, every nerve in my body tense. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. The rain masked most of the forest sounds, but those steps cut through it. They stopped again just a few feet from my tent. I could picture someone standing there, maybe facing the tent, hidden in the dark. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. The only thing I could think of was that I hadn't seen a single car or person since that morning. Whoever was out there, if it was a person, had no reason to be this deep into the woods in a storm. After what felt like minutes, the steps started again, moving slowly away into the trees. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore. Then I reached for my flashlight and checked the time. 11:27 p.m. My throat was dry, and I realized my hands were shaking. I stayed awake for a long time, listening. Every small sound made me jump. Around midnight, the rain grew heavier, pounding the tarp so hard that it drowned out everything else. I thought about unzipping the tent and checking outside, but the thought of shining the light and seeing someone standing there made my stomach twist. So I waited, It must have been around 2 a.m. when I finally dozed off. I didn't mean to, but exhaustion caught up. When I opened my eyes again, the rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, and the air felt colder. It was early morning, the kind of dim gray light that comes before sunrise. My first thought was that maybe I dreamt the whole thing. But when I crawled out of the tent and stood up, my stomach dropped. Around the tent, the soft mud was covered in footprints. Not animal prints, actual human ones. Barefoot. The impressions were deep, each toe clearly visible, and they circled the tent completely, like whoever it was had walked around me more than once. Some prints led off into the trees, fading into the wet leaves. The cold hit me hard then. I felt exposed, standing there in the open. I scanned the tree-line, but it was still misty, the kind of fog that hung low to the ground and moved like slow smoke. Nothing moved out there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me for hours while I lay inside the tent. I packed up as fast as I could. The tent was soaked, the ground slippery, my hands numb from the cold. I didn't even eat breakfast. Every sound in the woods, every drop of water falling from a branch, made me turn my head. When I finally got to my truck, the tires sank slightly into the mud, and for a moment I thought I'd get stuck there. But the engine started, and I reversed slowly down the narrow road, my eyes flicking constantly between the rearview mirror and the trees ahead. As I drove out, the rain started again, light at first, then heavier. The forest looked endless, dark and wet and empty. My GPS had lost signal hours ago, so I followed the road by memory, counting the turns I'd taken when I came in. It took almost 40 minutes before I hit the first stretch of gravel that told me I was close to the highway. When I finally reached the main road, the sky had begun to lighten a little, though the clouds were still thick. I pulled over near a small rest area and just sat there, breathing, trying to steady myself. I looked down at my boots. The mud on them was streaked with faint prints. At first, I thought they were my own, but they weren't. They were smaller, narrower, like someone had stepped too close behind me at some point. That was the moment it hit me how close they must have been. While I was asleep, someone, barefoot, in the middle of the woods in the cold rain, had walked right up to my tent, maybe even leaned in to listen. And I had just lain there, half awake, pretending it was nothing. I drove straight home that day, didn't stop once. When I got back to my apartment, I unpacked everything, left the tent outside to dry, and didn't go near it for weeks. The mud had dried on the fabric by then, but when I shook it off, I saw faint smudges along the bottom, like fingerprints pressed into the damp material. I've gone camping since then, but never alone, and never in the rain. There's something about that sound now, the constant tapping on the roof, the way it blurs everything around you. It makes you realize how easy it is for someone to move in the dark, quiet, and close, without you ever hearing until it's too late. Even now, when I think about that night, I can still picture those footprints in the mud, perfect, human, and leading away into the mist, like whoever it was had simply disappeared back into the forest. But I know they didn't vanish. They walked out just like I did, and somewhere out there, someone else might still be walking those same woods, barefoot in the rain, waiting for the next person to camp alone. It was the summer of 2011, and I had decided to take a solo camping trip through northern Montana. I was 26, fresh out of a job I hated, and I needed to clear my head. I picked a quiet area near Glacier National Park, not an official campsite, but a patch of forest I'd read about on some hiking forum. The kind of place where no one really went unless they knew where to look. That idea felt comforting at the time. I wanted to be alone, to sit in silence without anyone telling me what to do or where to go. The drive up was long and lonely. My old Ford Ranger rattled on the gravel road as I followed a narrow dirt path deeper into the woods. By the time I found a flat clearing to set up camp, The sun was slipping down behind the trees, painting the whole sky orange. I remember the air felt thick with that mix of pine and dirt that you only get far from the city. There wasn't another car or house in sight. It felt perfect, peaceful in a way that made the world seem smaller, quieter. I set up my small green tent near a fallen log, unpacked my cooler, and got a small fire going. The night came quick, and with it, the stillness. I could hear insects buzzing and the occasional snap of branches deep in the woods. Probably deer, I told myself. The firelight flickered across the trees, making them look like a wall of shadows. When the rain started, it came soft at first, just light tapping on the tent's roof. I was half asleep by then, lying in my sleeping bag, listening to it. The sound was almost soothing until it turned heavier. The drops got louder, sharper, like handfuls of gravel thrown against the tent. Wind picked up, shaking the thin fabric. I zipped the bag up higher and turned on my flashlight, just watching the walls of the tent tremble. Somewhere outside, I heard a sound. Not thunder, not the rain. Something like a low scrape. It wasn't close, but it was steady, like someone dragging something heavy through wet dirt. I froze. The sound stopped for a second, then came again, closer this time. My chest tightened. I turned off the flashlight and just listened. The rain masked a lot, but between gusts of wind, I could still hear it. A dragging sound, and then the crunch of footsteps. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, maybe a bear or an elk moving through the trees. But bears don't drag things, and elk don't walk that slow. The rain made it impossible to tell how far it was. My tent felt paper thin then. Every drop of rain sounded like movement. It went on for maybe 10 minutes, the dragging, the pauses, the faint crunch of wet leaves. I stayed still, barely breathing. Eventually it stopped, replaced by the sound of rain and wind again. I didn't sleep much that night. When I stepped out in the morning, everything was soaked. The forest floor was soft and muddy. My fire pit was drowned, and my gear was damp even under the tarp. The first thing I noticed was the footprints. They were maybe 20 yards away from my tent. Deep in the mud, large, boot-shaped prints. Definitely human. The dragging sound made sense now. A long streak ran beside the prints, like something heavy had been pulled along. The prints led from the trees toward the stream that ran behind my camp, and then disappeared into the water. I stood there staring at them for a while, trying to think of a reasonable explanation. Maybe a hunter, maybe someone passing through. But the footprints were fresh, made during the night, and no one in their right mind would walk through this forest at that hour in that rain. I tried to shake it off and went about my morning. I made coffee on my small stove and ate a protein bar, but I couldn't stop glancing toward the stream. Something about it felt off. I told myself I'd pack up and head out that afternoon instead of staying another night. Around noon, I went down to the stream to fill my bottle. The water was cold and clear, but near the bank, the mud was darker, disturbed. There were fresh marks in the ground, wide and uneven, like something had been pressed or dragged into the mud. I noticed a piece of fabric half buried near the edge, dark blue, maybe denim. I tugged it free and realized it was the torn leg of a pair of jeans. It wasn't old either. It hadn't been there long. That's when the feeling of being watched really started. The forest was too quiet for midday. No birds, no rustling, no movement at all. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I put the fabric down and walked back to camp fast. When I got there, my tent zipper was open. I knew I'd closed it before I left. My backpack was still inside, but everything was disturbed. Sleeping bag unrolled, clothes moved around. Nothing was missing, though, not even my wallet. Whoever it was didn't take anything. They just went through my stuff. I packed up right then, throwing everything into the truck bed without bothering to fold or organize it. The road back was rough, narrow, and muddy from the rain, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see someone behind me. About 5 miles down the road, I saw another vehicle parked off to the side. An old beige Chevy Suburban, the kind from the late 80s. The hood was dented, the windows streaked with dirt, and there was something about it that made me uneasy. It wasn't abandoned. There were tire tracks showing it had been moved recently. The driver's door was open, but no one was around. As I passed it, I noticed something hanging from the back bumper. A piece of wet denim caught on the metal. My stomach dropped. It looked exactly like the fabric I'd found by the stream. I didn't stop. I drove faster, bouncing over the rough ground until I hit the main road again. I didn't slow down until I saw signs for a small town called Libby. I pulled into a gas station there, parked near the store, and just sat for a while trying to calm down. Inside, I told the cashier that I'd seen an abandoned vehicle up the mountain road, just in case it was stolen or broken down. He nodded like it wasn't surprising, said people sometimes dumped cars up there. I didn't tell him about the footprints or the fabric. I just wanted to get home. A few days later, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I searched online for any reports near Glacier that week. I found one, a missing man from Kalispell, last seen hiking alone near the same forest. No details, just that he was in his 30s and hadn't been found. I still think about that night sometimes, the dragging sound, the footprints, the torn jeans. I don't know who was out there or what they were doing. Maybe it was connected, maybe not. But I've never gone camping alone again since then. When people ask why, I just tell them I had a bad experience. I don't go into detail because it always sounds crazy when I say it out loud. But sometimes, when it rains at night and I hear that steady tapping on the roof, I think back to that sound outside my tent, the slow, deliberate dragging, and I feel the same tightness in my chest. I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And somewhere out in those woods, there's a piece of fabric still buried in the mud, and maybe an old Suburban that no one's bothered to move. I just hope I never find out who was there that night or what they were dragging through the dark. I went camping alone for the first time in the summer of 2013. I was 25 then, living in Colorado, working as a mechanic during the week and trying to find some kind of peace during weekends. I had grown up fishing and hiking with my father, but after he passed, I hadn't gone out much. That summer, I decided I'd go alone for a few days. Just me, my tent, a small fire, and the quiet. I picked a spot near Gunnison National Forest, about 2 hours out of town. It wasn't an official campground, just a patch of land off an old dirt road I'd found on a map. There was a small creek running about 50 yards behind the tree line, perfect for washing up and refilling water. The place felt isolated, peaceful. I could hear the faint rush of water from where I parked my truck, and the air smelled sharp and clean, like pine needles and cold rock. By the time I arrived, it was late afternoon. I parked the truck in a clearing surrounded by tall pines, unpacked my tent, and got the fire pit ready. The sound of insects was constant, a low buzz that got louder as the sun dipped lower. I remember sitting down after I'd set everything up, just looking around, feeling good. The woods had that heavy quiet that feels full rather than empty, where every twig snap and distant bird call stands out clearly. When the sun started to go down, I lit a small fire and cooked a can of chili on the camp stove. The fire crackled softly, and the smell of smoke drifted upward into the trees. The night came fast once the sun disappeared. No streetlights, no glow from houses, nothing but the fire and a sky so thick with stars it almost felt unreal. The first night went fine. I heard a few sounds in the distance, probably deer or raccoons, but nothing close. I slept light, though. The forest has a way of making you feel watched, even when you know you're alone. The next morning, I went down to the creek. The water was ice cold, running over smooth stones, clear enough to see the small fish darting near the bottom. I filled my canteen and washed my face, then hiked a mile or so into the woods with my rifle. I wasn't hunting seriously, mostly scouting, getting a feel for the land. Around noon, I found an old trail that didn't look like it had been used in years. The dirt was packed hard, but grass had grown up in the middle, and branches from both sides reached across it. It ran parallel to the creek for a while, then curved deeper into the woods. I followed it a bit, but after 20 minutes I turned back. I didn't want to lose my bearings. When I returned to camp, I noticed something odd. Small footprints near the edge of the creek. They weren't fresh, but they looked like human prints, maybe from boots, though small. I assumed someone else had come through at some point, maybe another camper. That night felt different. The woods were quieter. Even the insects seemed to hum softer. Around 9 p.m., I was sitting near the fire, jotting a few notes in a small notebook I carried. I heard something snap in the trees behind me, louder than a branch falling, more like a heavy step. I froze. Came again, closer this time. It wasn't an animal walking through brush. It had rhythm, a pattern, step, pause, step. I slowly reached for my flashlight, turned it toward the sound, and swept it across the trees. The beam hit nothing but trunks and shadows. Then everything went silent again. I waited for a while before crawling into my tent. I zipped it up tight, turned off the light, and lay there listening to the quiet until I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I found something that made my stomach turn. There were fresh footprints in the dirt between my truck and the tent. Not mine, these were larger, and they circled the camp once, stopping near the fire pit. I could see where someone had crouched down. 2 clear knee impressions in the dirt. I checked my truck, my gear, everything. Nothing was missing. It bothered me enough that I considered packing up. But the weather was good, and I tried to convince myself maybe a hiker had wandered by. Still, the feeling that I wasn't alone clung to me the whole day. I spent most of that afternoon near camp, cleaning my rifle and collecting more firewood. Around sunset, I walked back toward the creek again, partly to calm myself down. The water's sound helped. I knelt near the edge, filling my canteen, and I noticed something on the opposite bank. A torn piece of blue fabric stuck to a bush. It looked like part of a jacket. I crossed the shallow section to grab it. The fabric was stiff and faded, maybe from the sun. When I looked closer, I saw dried mud and what looked like a faint stain, brownish like old blood. That was when I decided I'd leave the next morning. I didn't want to be paranoid, but between the footprints, the sounds, and that fabric, it didn't feel right anymore. That night was the worst. I didn't make a fire. I wanted to stay dark, hidden. I sat inside my tent with my rifle across my lap, the flashlight off. The forest was dead silent again, but after midnight, I heard movement. It came from the same direction as before, behind the trees where the creek was. It started slow, like someone walking carefully, trying not to make noise. The steps grew closer. Then they stopped, maybe 30 feet away. I could hear breathing, slow, steady breathing, just outside the edge of the clearing. My heart was pounding so hard I thought whoever it was could hear it. I didn't move. I just sat there, gripping the rifle, waiting. After what felt like forever, the breathing stopped. Then I heard the faint crunch of leaves moving away. I didn't sleep at all that night. At dawn, I packed up fast. My hands were shaking the whole time. The ground near where I'd heard the breathing was disturbed, as if someone had stood there a long time, shifting their weight. I didn't check further. I just loaded my gear and drove out, bumping down that dirt road as fast as I could. About 5 miles out, I passed an old ranger station. I stopped and told one of the rangers what I'd found: the footprints, the noises, the fabric by the creek. He looked serious and said they'd had a few reports of squatters or people living illegally out in the forest. Sometimes they stayed for months, surviving off the land. He said one of them had scared a group of campers a few weeks before, sneaking around their tents at night. Hearing that hit me hard. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't anything supernatural. It was a person. Someone had been watching me, maybe for days. Maybe they'd followed that old trail I found. Maybe they were living out there, hidden somewhere in those thick trees, moving only at night. I never went back to that area again. Even now, years later, I can still remember that sound. The breathing in the dark, so close I could almost feel it through the thin fabric of my tent. It's strange how you think you know what fear is until you feel it in your bones. Sitting alone in a silent forest, realizing that someone, another human being, is out there, standing just beyond the light watching you. After that trip, I sold most of my camping gear. I still go fishing sometimes, but never alone and never too far from town. Every time I hear a twig snap in the woods now, part of me still tenses up, waiting for that same sound again. The slow, steady breathing of someone who shouldn't be there.